Hello, and welcome to Get Recc'd. I am your host, Louis Falgout.
I am your other host, Stephen Falgout. Get Recc'd is our occasional podcast where every week I recommend something to Louis, Louis recommends something to me, and then we talk about it in the week following. We have an interesting eclectic mix of discussion topics today. We definitely had a very planned theme. The theme was Sans from Undertale.
Yeah, and Sans from Undertale is in our video. He's guest starring.
Yeah, he's guest starring. If you don't know, the reason why the theme works is because Werner Herzog is actually Sans from Undertale.
Or is Sans from Undertale actually Werner Herzog?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like a chicken or the egg scenario, you know? But
which came first, Sans or Werner Herzog?
Yeah, which came first? The classic debate, which came first, Sans or Werner Herzog? So thank you, Toby Fox, for finally, showing us the true Werner Herzog.
Yeah.
It's been under wraps for so long, but we're here to uncover the mystery, the myth. With that, Louis, why don't we go ahead and jump in?
Yeah, so what I recommended to Steven last time was the documentary Into the Abyss. It was directed by Werner Herzog, and just go for it.
Werner Herzog has an interesting way of kind of holding on people for like an uncomfortable amount of time. Also, a lot of the times in this documentary, he's asking questions that are very pointed and don't really necessarily have much to do with the topic, but in such a way that it's interesting because you get this reflection of humanity within just like general conversation that I don't think you would get from like a news outlet or a typical documentarian, because there are a lot of situations where he's just kind of uncovering information about the people that he's talking to's life that really has nothing to do with like the main topic of the documentary. But kind of where I'm going with that is like this whole documentary starts with he's at a graveyard talking to, I'm guessing, a pastor of some type who kind of oversees the death row, the kind of final thoughts of the death row inmates. And it's very profound and very powerful. And the reason why I kind of brought up that initial conversation was that he hangs on this person for an uncomfortable amount of time, just like open space, where I think most documentarians would definitely have edited that down into like the sound bites, but he's just kind of hanging on this guy as he's like crying and collecting himself. And it's like an interesting reflection of just like the whole nature of, and it puts into a very stark light the way that this whole documentary is framed, and then obviously kind of getting to the point of death row and whether death row is an applicable or not way to perform the final thoughts of a prison inmate.
Yeah, well, I guess we should probably talk about what this is about. So it's a...
No, I don't think we need to. I was just going to talk. Yeah, I was just going to talk about all... Yeah, and at this point, we've had enough episodes of the podcast that we expect you to be playing along at home.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen Into the Abyss, just get out of here, first of all. So we don't want you.
It's been a while since I watched this. It was like a month ago or so. It was a double homicide, right?
Triple
homicide. It was a triple homicide.
Triple homicide.
Yeah, it was a triple homicide by two people. The convicts, one of them is on death row and one of them's in for life. Michael Perry was on death row. I forget the name of the other guy. Jason something, I believe.
Yeah.
And this was somewhere in Texas, and they went into this like elderly woman's home and just murdered her to steal her car. And then after that, they ended up killing two other people who I think were related to.
Yeah, what it was a mom and two sons. Essentially, they went into her house or to try to find the two sons and essentially con them out of their car. And their sons weren't home, only the mom was home. So then they had the idea of, okay, well, instead, let's just murder her and take the car.
But there was, I think one of them was related to her, but I think another person was a friend of the son, because I remember there being like the brother of one of the other people who was not related to
Yeah.
so it was something like that. Yeah, but the film is kind of like grappling between both those things. So in one, it's like almost like a crime documentary talking about the crime. There's a very extended sequence where you actually see the footage from the police in her home, which is really, really hard to watch. But like after that point, then we kind of focus on the death row aspect of it, and also just talking to the convicts. And what I find funny that you said was that like most documentarians would edit it down. I feel like most documentarians would do a lot of this film differently. And I mean that in like a negative way to this film's credit, because I honestly I've not seen any other documentaries by this director, and I don't know how good he is. He might be. I mean I've heard his name around, but like just from watching this film, like I was really kind of almost at some points almost in awe of the things he decided to leave in and the things he decided to not cover. And the way he would ask questions, his interview style, he like interrupted the people he was interviewing constantly, which you don't do. And also like sometimes when he was talking to some of the family members, the way he would ask questions was like, yeah, it was pointed, but it was pointed just so he could get them to cry. It was like obvious. He just wanted them to cry, which is like, I understand you want to, you see people crying in this and it really draws out emotion, but it should be real. I mean, it is real, but it's like, he's like, hey, can you cry about this? And it feels kind of messed up a lot of the time.
Yeah. And some of his questions are almost condescending or patronizing in a way. Like very much so. And in fact, he is not afraid to express his opinion. Like the questions are very biased, and he is not afraid to do that, even with like people who are essentially convict. Because pretty much everyone he talks to is in some way either related to or is a convict, or was at some point a convict, even when he's not talking to the actual convicts. Because a lot of the players in this whole situation were at some point they sold drugs or in some way they were affiliated to. But he's not afraid to just like kind of dig into them regardless.
Yeah, which I mean, like, is a good thing to have in a documentarian. I think it's a good it's a good inclination to have, that like I am going to ask whatever question so I can get whatever, and like that's positive on paper. But it's like there ends up being a whole sequence where he's talking to one of the affiliates of Jason Burkett. That was the guy's name.
Yeah.
One of the affiliates of Jason Burkett, where he's asking the guy about how he used to be illiterate and how he got over his illiteracy, and it doesn't have anything to do with anything. Yeah. It's completely irrelevant.
And that's what I was kind of getting at, where like that whole sequence is what I was thinking of when I was talking about that. Like that whole conversation with that person honestly is completely irrelevant to the documentary. It's just like talking about his life, talking about how he's now got a good stable job, and in a way you can kind of frame it as like, okay, so like putting into perspective the prison system and how there is some like potential work there, right? And then now that this convict is out of prison, he was able to kind of have a more stable life. He learned to read and all this stuff, and I can kind of see it in that regard. But as you're thinking about it in the moment, you're kind of like, why is any of this happening?
Yeah, well, and because the guy was like a friend of Jason's. He wasn't. I think he might. I don't remember if he was related to the actual day that this happened. Like, I don't remember if he saw Jason go out or something like that. I don't think so.
He was, from what I remember, because basically what happened was the two convicts essentially started to brag about it. They were telling people that people were asking questions about how they got the car, right. And people were asking questions and they were saying, oh, it was the lottery. But then they changed their story to actually talk about the murder, and then they were kind of bragging about it. And this was one of the people that was kind of in that close group that they kind of quote unquote bragged about this whole situation to.
One of the things that I didn't get, that I'm wondering if what you have to say about, is that in the beginning of the film, it was towards the beginning of the film, Werner actually says his view of death row. He says like, yep. I don't have to like you to say that this is wrong. So I thought, okay, so we're doing a documentary that's going to look into why it is wrong, or at least give me a perspective on how it might be. Because I think his goal was to do the sort of draw your own conclusions thing. It seems like it as the film goes along, because he talks to the family members who are in favor of the the death penalty, like one who says that she's not necessarily in favor, but she says that it helped her watching him die. And if he was doing like a propaganda film or something, he probably wouldn't have included that. So I understand that, but then at the same time I wonder then if he's going to include his opinion in the beginning. What I didn't understand is he didn't talk at all. There's so many things you could bring up about death row. The statistics of death row, the amount of innocent people who were killed on death row, of which there is a number, things like that. Like, there's so many things you could have brought up in this documentary that he didn't. And I was confused as to why we were jumping around topics so much and we could never land on that topic and actually, get anywhere with it.
Yeah, that's why I feel like essentially the larger context of the film is that this documentary was more centered around how this affected all of the players' involved lives. So you get this, what's interesting is you get this dichotomy essentially between one of the convicts, Michael Perry, who does end up getting the lethal injection. And in fact, they talk to him before that happens. So you do get some conversation with Michael Perry, who's still basically trying to say that he was innocent, even though he told the police where the bodies were, and it's a whole thing.
They both
right?
are. Jason Burkett was also saying he was still innocent.
But then Jason Burkett, on the other hand, has the life sentence. So you have this interesting dichotomy just between the two convicts in this situation, death row and non-death row. But then also you get the kind of human context around the people who were involved from the standpoint of, as you mentioned, like a family member, which, by the way, as this documentary goes on, just the amount of, like, I don't know if I'd call it like horror surrounding this family, because you understand that then her dad had not that recently died from cancer, and she lost other brothers, and then the brothers who were murdered, and the mom, and it was just like astounding.
Yeah.
But then you also get the dichotomy from the Jason Burkett side, where now there's life, because essentially he has this woman who was like on the case and kind of fell in love with him, and then there was like some weirdness about now she's pregnant and all this stuff. So although it's not, as you mentioned, this is not framed in like the kind of propaganda mindset. Like, this is not a whatever that one guy is who does all the like super political, hyper political.
Michael Moore.
Yeah, Michael. This is not a Michael Moore documentary. This is a documentary more around like ascertaining the context from a human perspective of how death row affects people. So he did specifically state his opinion on the matter, as you mentioned, and very early on too. But there was never any inherent bias around that opinion surrounding this documentary. And that's why, like I mentioned, like I can now, thinking back on it, I understand the context of the questions and the interview style that he kind of had within the movie, like really, really ascertaining that human context. But yeah, you're right. I mean, in this film, the conclusion and even kind of the ending note of the film, right, which is like life coming out of death, it doesn't really necessarily help you on your own create any opinion of the whole system.
Well, nothing naturally flows. Maybe that's the main issue. Like, because as you're talking, I am thinking about it. And I suppose a lot of the things that really threw me off while I was watching it can make sense if you think about what his intention was and what he wanted to show in the documentary. And I assume you're right, because if he was trying to make a film, a political film, I mean, I guess it is inherently political, but like a politically motivated film, then a lot of this would have been very different. And I mean, I don't think he's so incompetent that if he wanted to make a point, he wouldn't have just made it, especially since he says at the beginning. But the problem is that, like, I mean, the editing of this movie is just so weird. It's just so like they even structure the film into chapters, and I have no idea why. Like, it's another thing where it's just like, oh, so now we're just gonna do something else, I guess. And it was like, okay. And the final thing that they showed in the film, this is the weirdest thing. I guess this is a spoiler. I don't know. You spoil documentaries? I guess you can. But the final thing in the film was there was this there's a man who worked with the inmates on death row before they were executed, who would be up to them up to the point of execution, and they have a good amount of interviews with him towards the end of the film. He shows up pretty late, which is fine because the film kind of goes into the death row topic very at the end. But then they close the film on this guy, which this might have been one of the weirdest choices in the movie. They close the film on him, and he says something about a family member told him to live his dash, which means the dash on your tombstone between your first date and your last date. So you have to make sure that you look. It's basically just live as if every day was your last sort of idea. And that's like the final quote. And I was like, what does that have to do with anything? Like, you want me to live I mean, like, I'm not going to go murder 3 people, ended up on death row. It's a really weird point. I don't know how that has to do with the prison system, with death row. Like, is the film just about life now? Because it's a fucking weird life. Yeah. If that's, the idea. I just don't.
Yeah, because the interview with that person to that point actually was quite powerful.
Yeah.
Because essentially he was talking about how he worked with these people, and then it got to the point where, like, when he decided to retire from that system, he was working with a woman who was on death row, and she held no anger, and she said, basically, like, bless you, you've done a great service and all these things. And that was, like, so profound to him, that shook him to the core so much that he essentially retired from the whole system. But then, yeah, you're right. Then it kind of ends with this, like, quote, which is an awesome quote. Like, I actually really like that. That's a cool idea. But it, like, doesn't make any sense. But that's why I kind of like framing it around that, like, that very last quote unquote chapter really is like life from death is kind of how I perceive it, because the quote essentially right before that is where he's kind of uncovering how this person that they've been talking to, who's in love with Jason or whatever his name is, she's now pregnant. Somehow, essentially.
Yeah.
But basically she is pregnant with his baby.
Yeah.
And so there's this kind of like life coming from death sort of oeuvre to that last chapter. But yeah, I agree. Like, just in general, like, the structure of this film, like, I can see from a meta structure, it kind of makes sense. Like, he starts by talking to the inmates and kind of getting into that. Then after you kind of understand you get perspective from the inmates. Then, as you mentioned, it goes more into kind of like this crime documentary where he's talking with the chief of police and they're showing actual crime footage and all this stuff. And then from there, it's just kind of like bopping all over the place.
Yeah. I will say this before we wrap it up on this, if we're good to. The last thought I want to get in is that I think it reminds me of when I took journalism classes. One of the main things that they told you about interview style and editing an interview is that, like, you're gonna get some, and actually, like, a lot of the time when you have an interview with somebody, they're going to say really cool stuff that doesn't necessarily have to do, or doesn't have to do at all with the idea you're trying to convey what the interview is about. And sometimes you have to just cut it. Like, you want to put it in because it's like, this is such a good quote, but it doesn't, if it's completely unrelated, and if it's in a weird place and doesn't have to do with anything, then you just get rid of it. And I don't think he learned that lesson at all. And I'm not just talking about the end. I mean, like, all throughout this movie. There's so many quotes he gets that are like, wow, that's really interesting. Like Michael Perry talking about a canoe trip. I'm like, okay, that's a story, but it was so irrelevant. And it didn't, like, make me care about him or teach me anything, because it was a really run-of-the-mill story, you know? So it was like, why even put this in there? It's just because it sounded cool. And then not only that, but just the way that clips are structured, the way that the interview sections are structured, everything, whatever main idea there was here got really, really muddled and lost on me, because it didn't seem like he was actually moving towards anything at any point during this interview. And there were so many different points that were tackled that weren't resolved that it was hard to tell which one was the main idea. Like, I still don't know what the main idea is. You can interpret it a bunch of different ways, which could be cool, but not when you're watching the movie and you're just like, why are we talking about this? And that, yeah.
Okay, so should we wrap it up?
Yeah, I think so.
This is an interesting one to rate. With all those things being said, though, I still feel like I largely and very much enjoyed this documentary, and I feel like it's highly recommendable. Like, I definitely would recommend this. It's an interesting watch. It's one of those things where, like, with any documentary, I don't think I would ever watch this again. I don't think I would ever watch many documentaries again. But it was an interesting and enjoyable ride, kind of getting through this. But with that being said, I don't know how high I would rate this. I'd probably put it somewhere around a 7. Like, I do like the meta structure. I do think that there are a lot of interesting concepts here and a lot of interesting quotes, and you really get to understand the human context, as I mentioned. But yeah, to all your points, I completely echo. Like, I don't understand what the message is. Maybe there wasn't supposed to be a message. Maybe it was just he wanted to do a documentary on death row and he did it, and that's what it is. But even that is like, you don't really get a documentary on death row. You get a documentary of just interviewing people, which I guess is interesting too. But anyway, yeah, so I'd probably give it a 7, but I would definitely recommend it.
If I had to think about scoring a documentary, I think my main thing would be not how interesting the subject matter is, because you can take any interesting subject matter and make a bad documentary about it. It would be like how I think the documentary was structured and how the interviews went and everything, how it was conducted, how it was edited. That's what makes a documentary into a great piece of art, you know? And I feel like this just really, to me, fails on a lot of really fundamental levels. The topic is really interesting, and there are sections of this film that were like really, really compelling. But they were few and far between. And it was me making my own meaning out of like one interview placed in a larger context that didn't really support that meaning. So, I wouldn't recommend it. I mean, I guess unless you know about this specific case and you're interested in it. I don't know if anybody else did a documentary on it, but you know, for a film itself about death row and what it means, I'm sure other people have tackled this topic and have probably done it better. So I'll give it like a 4, I guess. I really did not like it very much, and yeah, okay. So anyway,
this might have been. Can I just say this might be one of the very few times where not only were our scores different, but whether we would recommend it or not was completely different.
Well, it's definitely happened before.
It's definitely happened before.
Always with my Recs too. No, it isn't actually. That's not true.
That's not true.
I don't know. We don't keep track. So, Steve, let's
yeah,
get
someone
into
can
what
create
you
a wiki for
recommended
us later.
To me.
Okay, so Lewis, I recommended to you Undertale, the 2015 video game by Toby Fox, pretty much largely developed from the ground up by Toby Fox. In fact, I'm fairly certain he did pretty much everything from coding to game design to character work to even music.
Well, there was like Tem was an artist, I believe, who did some stuff for it or something.
Yeah. Like later.
Yeah.
And then yep, so the Toby Fox game Undertale, Sans from Undertale. Lewis, what did you think?
I am Sans. And that's basically all I have to say. Yeah. So I mean, obviously, I've never heard of this before. This is the first time I've ever heard of Undertale. So thank you for introducing me to this. I mean, you know, back when this was big, in like after it came out in 2015, and it probably had a month, a little bit under the surface, and then it was bubbling up, and it hit a point where this became like one of the biggest phenomenons of the decade in any medium. Period. Online anyway, for sure. And I mean, still to this day, like, it's still a huge thing. The sequel to this is coming out, kind of. There was a volume 1 of it anyway. Right. And it was huge again. So, you know, it's a really big deal. And
Sans from Undertale is in Smash Brothers, if that puts it into any perspective.
I actually forgot
Masahiro Sakurai, in an interview, talked about how Toby Fox came to his house and beat him at Smash Brothers.
Yeah, which means he needed to include. I don't know. Anyway,
yeah, that's actually how you get your character into Smash Brothers. If you can go to Masahiro Sakurai's house and beat him,
your original character.
Yeah, your original OC. Yeah, your Sonic OC can get into.
Yeah, so I played this when it was a big thing, and I thought it was pretty cool. But I was very much on the I guess the contrarian angle with this at the time, which a lot of people were, because it was cool to be. You know, I'm not gonna lie about that. That was a phase in my. I'm not like that anymore. I wouldn't behave that way. And so, but I still had remnants of that first playthrough, and I remember it was cool, and that was about it. And I wasn't exactly expecting to think that much more of it now, because again, this isn't really my medium. But I went through and I played a pacifist run finally for the first time, which when I played this game, I didn't know anything about. Well, I mean, I knew about that kind of stuff, but I didn't really understand it. So I did a neutral run, which is when you just kill whoever you want and save whoever you want. I mostly saved people, but I did kill some. And it basically just makes the game end shorter from watching the things. That's essentially all that does. And you miss a lot. And I didn't realize that until playing this pacifist run, and then watching True Pacifist, which is like an extension, and watching Genocide. I have a pretty good understanding of all the things in this game. And like, I'm completely converted. Like, this game is actually genius. I mean, it's incredible. not only the pacifist run, which is pretty much the game. That's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, you really should play it that way,
And
to be
it
honest.
tells you to. I mean, like in the tutorial, you are informed this is how you play it. So I don't know why I didn't. But like, it's just the fact that that's the way the game is supposed to be played, as though, you know, the main idea behind the combat system in this game is trying to find a way out of fighting and killing the enemy. The fact that that's the main idea, that's the way the game is set up, it could have very well been designed so that that's the only option you have, and that if you kill the enemy, you lose or something. But the game's, I think, morality and what it's trying to say is very much dictated around the fact that you can kill them if you choose to. And doing so, you will feel like the biggest piece of shit on the planet.
Yeah.
I won't say any of the actual death scenes, but I remember my first playthrough. I killed one of the early characters because I didn't know that I could get out of it. And oh my god, I was just like, I feel horrible for this. And it was one of the most lingering thoughts I had of this game, was how much that actually made me feel. Watching the genocide run and watching the deaths of all the main characters, it pretty much goes the same way. Like, if you want to be evil and you want to feel the consequences of being evil, this is a good game to do it with, I suppose, because you will understand it's pretty traumatic.
Yeah. Yeah, and as we said, like the pacifist run really is the way to play this game, but just as Lewis mentioned, like it is profound how much this game makes you feel for the characters in so little time that if you don't play a pacifist run, like you really feel the repercussions. And there's something larger here about games as a whole, because like going into this game, if you know nothing, your inclination probably is honestly to just kill the characters. Like, even though the tutorial says like kind of don't do it, like I'm nice, it's not super explicit. And even that first interaction that Lewis is talking about, it really seems like you have to kill the character. And when you do that, like there's some reflection on yourself about like how games have kind of like pushed you to be that person. But it's not like an overly like pretentious message, right? It's not like in your face. It's just like you go along and then you kind of feel what a natural repercussion of doing something like that would be. Yeah. And that's kind of how it is.
Well, that was exactly what I wanted to talk about. And since we're not going to spoil anything actually for this discussion, so I'll get right into that then. What I think is so creative about this is that, you know, a game like this, you could even put like Shadow of the Colossus in a similar oeuvre, because I think their sense of morality is pretty much the same, which I recently played that. It's very easy to look at this and think the moral is something as simple as like killing is bad and forgiveness is good and all those kinds of things, which are, I mean, they're dumb morals because they completely ignore or throw away context in every single situation. There's nothing, and the sense of morality is just so basic and obvious. But that's like, that is not what this is. I mean, yeah, killing is wrong, but that's not the point. It seems to me very much like a commentary on video games and desensitization as well. Like, this could not work in any other medium because the moral and the meaning of this is so directly tied to its medium. Like, and that's why it's set up in this RPG format where normally you would just be going around killing things. Like, you encounter things and you just kill them. And that's like, this is like, yeah, so what does that actually mean? And that's what this game explores. And it does so... You say it's not pretentious. I think the reason it doesn't feel pretentious for people, even though I think there are other games that could tackle this and maybe some people would get that out of them, is because this game is so lighthearted most of the time. It's full of humor in like every single thing, so that the moments when it isn't really, really hit you, where you're like, oh my god, like now something real has just happened. And if you play a pacifist run, you get these moments too. It's just that they're not like constantly hitting you like if you do a genocide run where you're just over and over again and really monotonously and tediously killing things. Like, you have to really want to waste your time to do that, which again is just so clever when you think about that. Like, that you have to just sit there and grind over and over again if you want to be the kind of person who's going to kill everything, which is really cool. And and that like I think that it's something I think we may have touched upon before because I know I've recommended things that are similar to this in that regard. That it's why I think comedy and drama, mixing like something that's really funny and both really sad, has that real emotional undercurrent that does come to the surface a lot, is a great combination because these two things are so contrasting that the absence of one really puts a lot of extra emphasis and context on the other. Like when it gets sad and there's nothing funny happening, it's really like, oh God. And that's what I think is so clever about the format and structure of this game.
Yeah, I want to hit on one thing you mentioned because I think one thing that makes, I feel like the video games of a medium still have so much to be explored. Like, to me, what makes a really powerful game is someone who can take that medium and amplify it. And I feel like, as simple as Undertale is, honestly, it's something, as you mentioned, that can only be done with this medium. And I feel like there's still so much room to explore within video games as a larger structure because you have so much agency, right? And that agency is very interesting. And there are games in the past who have tried to combat this, like BioShock in a way. There are some others that have tried to like explore this idea of like your autonomy is really kind of forced into a specific funnel because although you have complete control, really the designer is shepherding you along. And in this game, the designer really doesn't shepherd you along. You can kind of do whatever you want, but there are true and serious repercussions to that happening. And as serious as that sounds, as you mentioned, it's like this comedic, dramatic, two sides of the same coin situation. But there's so much of this game, even going further than that, that you could completely miss. 100%. Like, there are still sections of this game that I've only seen in videos. I haven't actually ever like gotten to that point because there's a lot of like backtracking and conversation, and there's this, what's interesting is there is this like life around each of these characters that they've fleshed out, and they've really fleshed out in a very detailed and specific way. So you can go back to like one of the characters' house and like you kind of like become friends with them. But if you had killed them, like that's not even something that you could do. Or if you just don't go back, that's not something that would even happen.
Well, the towns empty out, I think, as you do a genocide run, right? Like, and
right.
Like everyone's actually dying. So even the environment changes. And actually, I think there were settings I noticed in the genocide run that were not in the pacifist. You actually end up in different areas too, or at least the areas look different. Which again is just so great. And I think like, because there's a lot of games that do that kind of player choice thing where you can be good or evil, but you don't feel bad for being evil. If anything, being evil is way more fun. Like, think about like, I mean, I guess GTA, you're kind of supposed to be a bad guy anyway, but you have the option to be way worse. But like, you should, because it's fun to do that in a game like that.
Yeah, and one thing I also want to point out is a lot of games with that morality system, it's complete black and white, because you are you are rewarded for either being 100% evil, because usually there's some mechanic around being evil or good, like you're unlocking some different progression or something. So if you were to be gray, quote unquote, you kind of lose out on the full benefit of either or. Whereas Undertale, I feel like, and you mentioned it, like your first run through was not necessarily purely good or purely bad. It was kind of gray, and there is a game around the gray. So that morality feels more like a true balance between like the pure pacifist, the pure genocide, or the kind of gray in the middle, because you really could, and I had a very similar experience to you when I played this game the first time, where I didn't know there was a pacifist option. I killed the first character and I felt that weight, and I played pacifist from then on because I felt so profoundly affected by that. And there is a game around that. And then it also kind of, even that game around that kind of then gets you in this point where it's not like you get to the end and you feel like, oh man, I wish I would have done things differently, and this feels like a drag because now I have to play it again. I almost feel like it shepherds you into wanting to play it again to understand and experience that new way, that new run.
Something I suppose we should briefly talk about is the actual gameplay. It's amazing we can go that long praising it without even talking about that. Of course, the gameplay is pretty simple, but like, the main gameplay element in this, aside from just walking around and talking to people like a normal RPG, is a little. The battle system is. I don't know how unique it is because I don't know. I'm assuming it is pretty unique. But what it is you're a little heart and there's a box. Whenever you're fighting an enemy, you have an option to do something, and then when it's their turn, you have to dodge. I want to say bullets, but it can be anything. There's so much weird shit that they come up with that you have to dodge, and it's all dependent on the enemy. Even the little enemies have really creative and weird things they do that are related to their personality and the way they look, and it's like you get character from everything because of this system, which is just an amazing feat. And then, of course, the characters who are super fleshed out, you can see their attacks reflect that. And the game is fairly challenging. I mean, like, as you go along, the difficulty progression, I think, is really natural, too, and feels very right. It feels like the game is actually ramping up. And it ramps up pretty quickly. I mean, even in the beginning, some of the enemies do some things that appear like they're going to be really hard, and they actually aren't. But it does gear you up to learn how to dodge and learn how to behave. For one thing, it's really fun. But even aside from the fun angle, like I'm just blown away by the amount of different things they came up with this. One of the first ones you see is a ghost who's really sad, and the ghost cries, like tears come out of his eyes from above you and come down onto you, and it's all stuff like that where it's like, whoa, that's like so unique. And even if it's not hard, sometimes in fact they set it up so that you pretty much can't get hit because that's relevant to how the battle is going. And it's like, again, just there's character in every single thing here. It's not just in the dialogue, but it's even in like fighting little random enemies. You learn, oh, so they're like this, and that's cute or that's funny.
Yeah, and then on the flip side of that, on the attack, if you were to go for an attacking run, what's interesting is it's almost kind of less fun. Like you mentioned, it's a grind, and like the actual battle mechanics for how you attack are super straightforward. Like it's like a line, and you have to try to line it up in the middle, and then you do the most damage.
It's the same thing every single time.
And it's the same thing every single time. Versus the kind of more pacifist run is you're having these unique interactions with the characters. Like there's like this sub menu of skills, quote unquote, and like for instance, there's a character that's a dog, and you can like pet the dog.
You have to learn which order to do things in too.
Yeah.
And there are some enemies where it seems like you have to actually damage them a little bit before you can get them to do something too. So you have to learn, okay, here's their character, here's their dialogue. I have to learn how.
So there's almost kind of like a puzzle mechanic around it, like uncovering, like almost working like a puzzle around each of the characters.
I can't tell you how much more gratifying it is than doing the fight system too. Like, and it really is, the more you think about how much they made fighting and killing enemies just feel terrible and suck, that you realize like how brilliant it is that they even let you do it in the first place. Like that if you're going down that genocide path, it really is designed from the ground up to be as unpleasant as humanly possible. And I think some people aren't going to like that, because some people are going to, if they're going to have a game with multiple endings, they're going to want to enjoy all three endings. But you know, I get that, but like the fact that you're not supposed to enjoy it, and he took that mindset into every single aspect, is impressive. And yeah, I would never want to do that. But even watching it is like almost like a chore. It's just like, oh my God, you just sit there fighting the same damn enemy over and over again. And yeah, so this system to me is just, it makes the game so much fun. And it is fun. And a pacifist run is mostly pretty pleasant. It's a pretty pleasant romp. It's funny. There are definitely like there's emotional moments, but it's more sentimental than it is like sad or depressing or something. And like a true pacifist has a really nice little ending. I mean, really the ending in general is just lovely in the pacifist run, as opposed to the neutral, which is pretty much nothing if I remember. It's kind of, you just kind of end. Yeah. And the last thing that I'll mention about the genocide run is the Sans fight, which is like, I won't say too much about it, I suppose, but like, as some people I guess still probably don't know, I don't know. But like, even the genocide run is the genocide run is kind of known as the hardest one, and that's just because this boss battle is like one of the most insane things I've like ever seen. I'm like, how does anybody even learn this shit? Which, yeah, it's pretty I don't know. I guess it's pretty well done. But anyway, I guess we can wrap it up.
Before we wrap it up, I just want to mention one last thing. The soundtrack is incredible.
It is really good.
It's so good. I still listen to some of these tracks. It's so good. And some of those fights, like the soundtrack only amplify the experience.
So when it comes to touring this game, I have only one critique of the game I didn't mention. I'll mention it briefly, is that like for me, and some people will feel differently, I'm sure, but like the humor was hit or miss for me, because I think one of the problems in having humor in these dialogue boxes is that you're going through the boxes at your own pace, so the timing can be really, really badly off, especially with the music in the background. Music cues can be missed, and some jokes just really fell flat on their face for me in a way that I kind of couldn't look past. It was rare, though. I'm glad that the game is that humorous, but it's just sometimes it was like, and other times it is pretty funny. So, the fact that that's my only problem, I mean, that's a really small thing, but yeah, I mean, scoring the game, I don't know, 9. I'll go 9.5, because I think like in literally every other aspect, I'm blown away, and I was blown away playing this again and watching everything into it, and the way the game gets its meaning across, but manages to do so in a way that's really, really enjoyable too, especially if you play the game the way it's intended to be played. It is so much fun. Just as a game, you can even toss all the symbolism and everything else aside that we were talking about, all the meaning, and this game is just really fun to play if you do pacifist. So, I mean, yeah, of course I recommend it. I mean, you should absolutely have played this by now or play this now. I'm upset I missed out on it so much just because I had to be so contrarian at the time. But
And I think I give this a 10. I mean, it's definitely in my top 10 list. It just had such an impact on me then and even still. And yeah, I definitely recommend it as well.
Okay, so now we're going to get to the recommendations. We have a theme for next time because we're going to be getting into it is the Halloween season, I suppose, but we'll be closer to Halloween next episode. I don't know how long we'll wait. And so just like last Halloween, we're doing a spooky theme, a spooky podcast. It's going to be even spookier this time. I can
Yeah, we're
guarantee
maxing out the spook.
it's going to be the spookiest thing you've ever seen.
Yeah, you're gonna turn it on and we're gonna be like boo, and you're gonna be scared the whole night, nightmares.
Yeah.
You're never gonna want to listen to a podcast again, except for ours. You have to listen to ours.
It'll be
You're
that
legally
dramatic.
mandated.
Yeah, so with that out of the way, I will recommend something to you, Stephen. I'm recommending a YouTube channel. The YouTube channel is Nana825763. You'll have to, I guess, go back to this to remember that number combination. I want you to watch 3 videos in specific and then pick other ones that look spooky. You can, I don't know, do like 5 or 6. But the 3 that you have to watch are, and do them in this order: Username 666, Poco Poco Shopping, and My House Walkthrough. Watch those in that order, and then this channel's pretty varied, and a lot of the channel is Minecraft Let's Plays now, which is the weirdest shit to me. But this channel's been around for a really long time, was one of the first horror channels on YouTube, I would say, and definitely kickstarted a remarkable number of really, I want to say dumb trends, because people just never recaptured it. In YouTube horror, where you do, I don't know, something freaky, scary happens, and then whatever. And yeah, you'll be able to tell which videos are which if you want to pick out extra ones, I think. So yeah, that's all I got. Okay. And what do you got for me? Oh, you're locked. I don't know what that means. Okay. Hang on.
Okay, Lewis, I'm going to recommend to you the 80s film Poltergeist, classic 80s horror film. We will talk about it in the next episode.
Okay. And that pretty much does it for today. I don't know how much we actually have to say other than that.
No, I don't
Are we
think much.
waiting
I'm gonna
like 2 or 3 weeks for the next one, or
yeah,
how
well,
close we can get to
yeah,
Halloween?
we're gonna try to get a little closer to Halloween, I think.
I think we managed Halloween last time, but we might not be able to this time.
Yeah, maybe not this time. We'll see.
So,
okay, yeah, no. Besides that, we'll be on Castbox, so keep checking us out there. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. With that, those were our thoughts. Those were our recommendations. Get wrecked.